Everybody to the Alzheimer's Disease and Dementia Advisory Council. We've got a lot on the agenda, so I want to get started right away. We had an absolutely fantastic meeting back in July, and we want to continue that discussion. We've been doing a lot of research. We have a lot of guests who are coming up here to share information. But before we get too far, I want to introduce Senator Clint Penzo, who is now going to be joining this committee as the co-chair. Senator Ricky Hill loves serving on this committee, but he has a lot of other duties, and so he is letting Clint Penzo take over, and I'm going to let Clint kind of introduce himself and say why this committee is important. By the way, Ricky Hill said he still wants to be involved and informed and wants to be helpful, so he's not leaving, he's just letting someone else come in and get involved too. So.
Well, like you said, my name is Clint Penzo. I'm from Northwest Arkansas. I live in Springdale. Represent District 31, which is Tawnytown, Elm Springs, Springdale, and Johnson, all in Washington County. When Senator Hill asked me if I wanted to be involved in the group, I told him absolutely. My dad's got early dementia, and so I kind of have a personal connection to this committee, so I was thankful that I was asked to do it. I don't know if they knew my situation when they asked, but I couldn't say no. So looking forward to working with you all over in the future. Thanks.
And he has on purple, and I've got on purple too. So I don't even know if did you plan that purple?
I got the memo.
Oh, okay, good. Purple for Alzheimer's. So, okay. First thing we need to do is approve our motion. Approve our minutes. I'm going to get the right word down. Approve our minutes. Do I have a motion for that? So move. Is there a second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, motion. Okay, we are going to pick up, so just to remind ourselves, Dr. Way gave an absolute fantastic presentation at our last meeting on Alzheimer's medications. I mean, here we are so excited that now there's something out there that might be able to help, and we know that things are only going to get better from this point forward with some other things in the future. But you brought up a lot of interesting concerns, and so we brought some folks to the table. Some of those concerns were that we have this new medication. Is it going to be available in Arkansas? Like physically, is it actually going to be in the state of Arkansas for anybody to get? So we're going to have the Pharmacy Association kind of address that and let us know. We have also then began to question, so do we have these medications require an early diagnosis of Alzheimer's? How do we get that early diagnosis of Alzheimer's to even qualify for the medication? Then the next hurdle is, will insurance companies pay for it? So we've done a lot of investigating. We have 2 letters that we'll address here in just a second from some insurance companies when we get to that. But very first thing, let's start off, if you don't mind, we brought in the Pharmacy Association because we first want to talk about if these medications are even going to be available to people in the state of Arkansas. So first on our list, John Vinson, Chief Executive Officer of the Arkansas Pharmacists Association. I'm going to introduce some of the other people who are here in the room. Jill Johnson, the Professor of Pharmacy Practice at the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences. Wave your hand, Jill. There you go. And on the phone, online here, we have representing the Eli Lilly Company, and that's Maureen Jaffa, not Laura Cohen, so ignore that. It's Maureen Jaffa. We also have Elizabeth Pittman from the Director of Medical Services here in Arkansas, who will be joining us as well. So, John, I'm going to let you have the first word. Can we get this medicine in Arkansas?
All right, awesome. My name is John Vinson. I'm CEO of the Arkansas Pharmacists Association. And just for the record, because I have one of my colleagues and a student pharmacist, I want him to just introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hayden Wood. I'm a second-year student pharmacist at the UAMS College of Pharmacy. I'm up from around Floral near Batesville in northeast Arkansas. I'm just here to help out with today's presentation.
And I am also a licensed pharmacist here in the state and practiced for many years prior to the advocacy world and the association world. And just like Senator Penzo, I have this disease in my family too, in my immediate family. So this is important to me, and I'm very pleased to be asked. Thank you for inviting us to be here today. So just want to, I did watch the last hearing and was able to see the discussion, great presentation and information shared based on what I've been able to research and understand, and then we're happy to answer questions. But just to make a real quick overview of what's going on in this space. So most prescriptions that are filled at local pharmacies, the vast majority of prescriptions are accessible in the pharmacies, but there's a growing number of new medicines that are coming to market that are more expensive, they're more complicated, they have special monitoring, and I know all of you heard about that at the last meeting about the special MRI machine, and has to be infused over a few hours and under the supervision of healthcare professionals, and then follow-up because of some of the really severe side effects. And that is not unique to this drug. There are lots of new medicines that are coming on the market that require a greater level of oversight and more complicated in terms of how they're administered. We've been used to that in the chemotherapy space for cancer, but we're seeing that more and more with many other disease states beyond just the oncology or cancer state, and this drug does fall under that category. The drug that's currently available, and you heard a presentation about two, and one that's not yet available and one that is. Leqembi is the drug that is currently available, or at least it's been approved. When I say it's currently available, it's been FDA approved for use. The early approval, and this would probably be better to ask directly of Eisai or from the pharmaceutical manufacturer industry, but I'll give you my perspective from the pharmacy perspective. So with the class of trades that are currently approved or allowed by the manufacturer, so this is not a federal law or state law, this is being determined by the manufacturer. Currently, they're allowing certain dispensing physicians, certain hospitals and infusion sites of care, and I can't comment today on which of those would be allowed. You'd be better asking Hospital Association or Medical Society on clinics or hospitals or infusion centers that are in the medical side. But from a pharmacy's perspective, there are some pharmacies that if they have an infusion suite or a chair that's allowed to do this, and there are none of those in Arkansas that I know of, but doesn't mean there couldn't be, but I'm not aware of that. And the specialty pharmacies are pharmacies that deal in high-cost, $5,000 a month prescriptions and above, and really the definition is probably $1,000 a month and above, but the most average price would be $5,000. We do have a handful of those in the state that specialize in that, one here in West Little Rock, a Walgreens specialty infusion, or not infusion, but specialty pharmacy here in Little Rock, and Heartland, and there's one in Searcy that in theory could do this. But at least initially, based on demand and what's been decided by the manufacturer, there's only a single pharmacy in the entire country that is allowed access currently. So it's limited distribution. That doesn't mean that Pharma or Eisai won't expand that if there is higher utilization or better coverage by insurance companies, but at least on their initial kind of scope of the market and looking at where this looks to be launching, they have started with a single specialty pharmacy. That specialty pharmacy, the Soleo, S-O-L-E-O, just for those of you who may not have ever heard of it, they're based out of Frisco, Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Frisco's not too far from us in terms of location, but the actual physical location of the pharmacies that would dispense these, if they were needed for a clinic or infusion center that couldn't get it directly, would come from Tempe, Arizona, or Cincinnati, Ohio. So they do have two licenses in the state that are in good standing with the State Board of Pharmacy. And the State Board of Pharmacy, be better to get it directly from John Kirtley or his team. But my understanding from talking to the staff at the State Board of Pharmacy is they would allow Soleo, because this drug has to be administered under a physician or under qualified healthcare professionals like nurse practitioner, physician with the right monitoring equipment, they would allow, if that Soleo did fill the prescription, for it to be mailed and delivered directly to the clinic or hospital. So it doesn't have to be, ordinarily prescriptions are sent to a patient's home or directly to patients. But because of the way this one is administered and the unique circumstances around it, I just wanted to clarify that not ideal. I'd like for it to be accessible in Arkansas-based pharmacies, especially if we're going to spend state dollars on these kind of drugs. I'd love for there to be better access, but the current situation based on the demand and what's expected from the manufacturer is there's a single pharmacy in the specialty world out of either Tempe, Arizona, or out of Ohio. And I'll stop there and see what questions the committee has.
Any questions from the committee? None? Okay. Thank you. Hang out, because we got, I'm sure others will come up as we continue to talk about this. Did you have anything?
And could I just
Sure.
make one kind of closing comment? I know we're talking about Alzheimer's and we're talking about a single drug right now, but I do think, especially for legislators in the room, from a policy perspective, this is going to continue to come up over and over for other disease states with heart disease, with asthma, with lung disease, and others to have a policy discussion about how to ensure access locally. I'd just like to leave you with that.
Okay. Very good information. We didn't have any of those answers before. We now know. So, so there is a possibility that someone could get that medication, a whole bunch of hoops to get through.
Correct.
But then who's covering it? So let's see if we can talk a little bit about that. So you'll see in your packet, you have 2 letters, handout C. Unfortunately, Jack Hopkins with Centene and also Max Greenwood with Blue Cross could not be here today. They very, very much want to testify before the committee and said that they would come to another meeting and you can ask more questions. I'm going to briefly read a little bit of the letter from Centene. It says, regarding Leqembi, am I saying that correctly? Whew. Okay, Leqembi. Okay, the drug mentioned in the Democrat Gazette letter to the editor, we do cover for an initial approval duration of 3 months, 6 doses of infusion. And the drug must be prescribed by or in consultation with a geriatrician or neurologist. There are a few requirements for authorization, namely documented presence of beta amyloid, functional and cognitive tests, etc. General standard documentation for approval. Regarding the prospect of new drugs entering the market, because we will talk about, we have Eli Lilly on the phone, we will talk about some potential other medications. So they're all evaluated by our pharmacy and therapeutics company, our committee, and the evidence reviewed as far as safety and efficiency. Then a decision is made whether to include that based on that. Short summary of his letter. Blue Cross, you can read in detail. It's actually several pages long. I feel like Dr. Jill Johnson, who's with us, might be able to go into more detail because I think her comments will be similar to this. So I'm just going to give a nutshell, is that Blue Cross is saying that they will not cover it. I have also heard from Derek Smith, who represents United Health, and they are still determining. So we do not know from United Health. So Jill Johnson, I'm going to let you go ahead and speak. You are here representing Employee Benefits Division. Do you mind sharing with us some of the concerns that you have discovered with Leqembi?
Certainly. Thank you for having me. My name is Jill Johnson. I am a clinical pharmacist. I work at UAMS for 30 years. I still work on an acute care inpatient team. For about 19 years, I've worked with the evidence-based prescription drug program, and EBD is one of our clients, along with our own UA Systems and several other plans who provide insurance and pharmacy benefits for their employees. I teach evidence-based medicine at UAMS, have for 20 years now, and I chair the EBRX Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee. So much of what I'll say today about how we voted has to do with the collective group of people, but I'll tell you what we found when we looked at it. So Leqembi is a drug Alzheimer's patients have to be put on it early in their disease when they have mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia. And they have to go and get an infusion every 2 weeks. When they got the FDA approval, they measured the primary endpoint on the trial. The way that they measured whether or not it was effective was something called the Clinical Dementia Rating Sum of Boxes. And it's supposed to detect their functionality, like how well they're functioning, how well their caregiver thinks they're functioning, and it collects that. So it's a range of 0 to 18. And what's good about Leqembi is that it did slow the progress. Statistically, it didn't stop it. People still progress with their Alzheimer's disease on the drug, but placebo progressed faster. So then when you look at the difference between how fast placebo progressed and how fast they progressed on the drug, the difference was only 0.45 points, and therein lies the problem. There's something called the minimal clinically important difference, and that has to do with how a patient feels, because that's really who matters here, right? And so although statistically Leqembi slowed the progression of Alzheimer's, it wasn't to the degree that patients could feel. The minimal clinically important difference was somewhere between 1 and 2 points. And even on the far end of the range, the best they got was a slowing of 0.67. So they didn't exceed, or they didn't reach the threshold of the point where a patient can tell they're taking it, can feel it on average. In addition, there are adverse reactions. Not only are you at risk for infusion reactions, those can be managed. It's probably why we don't see the drug being, one reason that it's not being rolled out is because pharmacies typically don't have offices where they're set up in case they have a reaction. It's one thing to have an office to get the infusion, but what if something goes wrong? They've got to be staffed to be able to handle what's going wrong in these patients if it happens. In addition to that, one of the things that we know happens in not only the original drug, you probably remember Aduhelm, it got all kinds of news. This second Alzheimer's drug also has this problem called ARIA. It's amyloid-related, what's it stand for? Imaging abnormalities on PET scan. Some of them are edema, some of them are hemorrhage. The rate differences for edema were 12.6% versus 1.7% in placebo. So about 11% more people on average. So that means every 9th person who got an infusion over 18 months experienced one of these abnormalities on PET scan. For the hemorrhaging, it was 17% versus 7%. So the number needed to harm, meaning every 10th person over 18 months would experience a PET scan abnormality indicating a hemorrhage or a microhemorrhage. Are there any questions so far? Okay.
I don't see any, so go ahead.
I've got more information, and I don't know if clinically that's about it for Leqembi. We are hopeful, but the bottom line is it didn't reach that threshold where patients could feel that it was working.
Okay. I'm going to also pull up Elizabeth Pittman, if she is here. Is she here yet?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. You're hiding up here. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
So do you mind sharing, Medicaid, will Medicaid be covering this?
Yes, ma'am. So Medicaid's policy regarding drugs is if it's FDA approved and there's a federal rebate on it, meaning Medicare is covering it, we cover it. And this is a drug that falls into both of those categories. So this is a drug that Medicaid is covering, and we are getting a federal rebate on, the Leqembi. Now, anything not FDA approved yet, we obviously don't cover.
So now we've kind of heard some are, some aren't. So I'm going to open it up to the committee to ask questions, kind of gearing this towards coverage, why covering, why not covering. And I believe Carrie Jordan had some questions. No?
they weren't formulated yet.
Oh, okay. Jennifer then.
Yes. Just clarification. So on the hemorrhaging and all of that, I'm not medical, so I'm just asking this. If they had dementia, or is it just all of, like, did you have some that had dementia, some that had Alzheimer's, some that had Parkinson's in the scope?
In the main trial was Clarity AD. It had patients 50 to 90 who were all Alzheimer's disease patients and who had evidence of amyloid on PET scan to begin with. So I guess that would have been the population.
Okay.
I have a question, Carrie Jordan. You mentioned that you were saying that the study was saying that the person wasn't aware that they were changing. Was there any studies that evaluated the caregiver's perceptions of how the person was doing?
To my knowledge, the primary endpoint was what they measured, the change, the clinical dementia ratings, sum of boxes. That was the primary endpoint. And whenever a trial is done, it has, like, they look for the primary endpoint. And if they see a benefit, which they did see statistically a benefit, just not clinically a benefit, then they can go to the next ones. And several of the other endpoints were safety.
Okay, Senator Hill, Senator Love. I think, did you have a question?
No, I'm gonna wait.
You're going to wait. Okay, David Cook from Alzheimer's Association.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Just had a question on when you do consider coverage for other drugs. Are there other drugs that have also presented similar risk factors? And was the primary consideration just the clinical evidence that you had available, the research, the clinical trial evidence research?
At EBRX, we first consider the clinical efficacy and the safety. We move on to the cost, and I can discuss that a little bit if you'd like, or I can omit that, however you want it. Would you like me to proceed? So
yes.
With the cost, the cost is $26,500 per year. And the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, it's the short is ICER. I work with ICER. They are based in Boston, but they're kind of all over. And they are they're an independent nonprofit, sort of think tank, trying to place a value call on drugs. They deemed that this drug was not cost effective at the normal willingness to pay thresholds, that it would need to cost, instead of $26,500 a year, for what it is able to do clinically in this population, it would need to cost somewhere between $2,900 and $19,600, somewhere in there. So it's overpriced for what it does, and so for the clinical, for the harm, for the way it's infused, that was not as big of a deal. But with the cost altogether, it exceeds its value. We considered it a very low value drug for money, and so we pit the ability for it to help versus the ability for it to harm, and then the cost is factored in.
Just by comparison, how does that cost relate to other drugs that we have on the market, such as like for cancer and other disease types?
We try to incorporate cost effectiveness data all the time because, as you all know, our health benefits in the United States are not on a sustainable trajectory, and not all the time, but many times the drugs are priced outside of their value. And so we incorporate that evidence, the cost effectiveness evidence, every time we can get the good data, good peer-reviewed, published data, we incorporate it and make similar decisions within EBRX.
Dr. Azar? Yes.
Thank you so much for the presentation. This thing fell off. I actually am filling out a form to request Leqembi to be on the pharmacy at UMS right now. I'll do the same for donanemab because the disease itself is so devastating. It is like cancer. It progresses relentlessly it kills the person in the end in a very sad way. So I appreciated David Cook's question about not only the cost, but I will add on to it the quality of life, the severe harm, that severe intense torment the patient and the family suffers from it. So when we evaluate cancer drugs, and I'm on IRB committees and see those protocols with 1 trillion side effects, patients still take those drugs because you're fighting endless battle, a terrible battle, life and death battle. This is the same thing, you lose the person totally. So it is equivalent in the burden of the disease and healthcare, it is the same. So yes, you are right, there are side effects, but I would say that the cancer drugs, which I read about, have worse side effects, and yet it is a matter of survival and for someone to live a few months longer and to be with their loved ones. If the patient and the caregiver are willing to take on the side effects with an informed consent, which we are developing at UMS, we will develop an informed consent in which all the side effects, the mild, the infusion side effects, the major side effects, will very well be outlined for them to read. And they still want to take the drug. And by the way, I've had one patient in whom I did give Aduhelm outside at an infusion pharmacy. The patient was only 60 years old. He did very well. So, if the monoclonal antibody is not targeted only to the hippocampus or to one particular area, it goes all over the brain. So the consensus of the neurologist when I was sitting on a committee was that if it hits the sweet spot in the brain, it will do good. And in this particular patient, it did do good. So he was walking faster, he was able to drive, he was able to do well. So I think there are considerations for safety. We in geriatrics are very, very conservative, and we take care of our patients very well. But there's also hope, and I don't want to take hope away, and I don't want to take this opportunity away from our patients. Thank you.
Dr. Way, yes.
Thank you. I want to thank Dr. Johnson and Mr. Vincent and everybody else for your comments. I would just like to point out, if I may, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, that most of the symptoms from the area are actually not. In other words, for the hemorrhages or the microhemorrhages or the edema, most of the patients do not have any symptoms. I think that's noteworthy. We could say, what does that really mean? Well, they are not experiencing the symptoms. And I think that's noteworthy, especially for families of these patients and especially for their loved ones, because they're not the ones who are hurting. The only thing, honestly, that we're talking about, because safety is pretty clear, is the cost. And of course, it's terrible to think about the cost, but there is a cost.
Okay. Hayden Wooden, yes.
Dr. Way, was it?
Yes.
Okay. I was going to give you some data on that I was able to find. When you were talking about the intracerebral hemorrhaging, really it was 4% were mild cases, so 37 of 898 patients screened. Moderate was 7%, so 66 out of 189 patients. And there was only a severe intracerebral hemorrhages resulting in near fatal experiences at 1% rating, so 9 in 898 patients. And resolution occurred. 81% resolution occurred by 17 weeks.
And Amy Lee Overton.
I was just curious, in the cost benefit, was it calculated into the caregiver's loss of wages as well as caregiver respite and expenses of care, if they were benefiting from the drug, if they were improving, were they able to stay at their job longer, the caregiver?
Yes. Two things. One thing is that neither the drug that's on the market, Leqembi, or the one that's aimed for market, donanemab, have been shown or were looked at for prolonging life. So making you live longer, neither one has looked at that. Neither one has found that. As far as the cost effectiveness, they actually ran it on, like, from a societal perspective, which would incorporate, like, the caregivers and the burden on caregivers, because it's major. My mother-in-law died of this in 2020 during the pandemic, and it was 8 long, ugly years. And if you consider the societal perspective, it could cost, it needs to cost anywhere from $4,300. It could cost up to $25,000. But considering that, and that's, even if it's priced at $25,000, the willingness to pay threshold is $200,000, meaning it's still, that would be considered low value for money care as far as pricing a drug. I mean, these drugs aren't alone, and I mean, anytime you run a Markov model, it's not, the healthcare perspective, as far as the little bit, because we make our decisions at EBRX first on efficacy, and pointing out that it didn't reach the level of minimal clinically important difference. The healthcare perspective of the cost effectiveness says that it needs to cost as little as $2,900 per year, as much as $19,600. So still in the same range, but we don't make all of our decisions on cost. But in this case, the efficacy wasn't there, which is why EBRX voted to not cover this.
Dr. Johnson, if I could ask a question, if I understood you right. You mentioned two drugs that are ineffective at treating. One of them has FDA approval and one doesn't. Why would a drug that doesn't prolong life, make better quality of life, why would it get FDA approval? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me that a drug would be approved by the FDA that is ineffective.
That's a very good question, and it happens all the time. The FDA's charge is to compare a drug against placebo. And sometimes they just use a single-arm trial, and they look at how they were doing before, they get the drug, and they decide how they're doing after. In this case, there was a placebo arm. And in this case, the FDA accepted that a statistically significant change, however insignificant the clinical change was, they said that if it was a statistically significant change in that CDR sum of boxes, that was sufficient evidence. It's just that many of the experts disagree on that point and recognize that if you use the measuring stick, which I believe that we should, does a drug or any therapy make you live longer or better, then we should think about adopting it, right? And in this case, they don't make you live longer, but it's really in question on whether it makes you live better and whether or not the patients can tell that they're slowing down any differently than they would from placebo.
I think this might be a good time to bring in those who are on the phone with us. And that is Maureen Jaffa from the Eli Lilly Company. And thank you for being with us. I know you've been listening in, and the drug that you have has not been approved by the FDA yet, but is similar. And so you've been listening and just kind of wanted your general feedback on what you've heard and what you might want to share with everybody who's listening.
Sure, and thank you so much for the opportunity to connect with you guys today. And I actually do have some slides. Is it okay if I share those here?
Sure, go ahead.
Let me just make sure. Okay. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes, we see that just fine. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So this has been a really rich discussion. It's been great to hear the conversation, and I'll try to sort of address different things as relating back to the conversation as I go through these slides as quickly as I can, but please feel free to jump in and stop me with questions. But just to clarify, our drug is not yet approved. It's sitting at FDA, the drug application right now, and so a little bit different than what the conversation folks were. It is in the same class, but it is a different drug. It's called donanemab. So just real briefly about Eli Lilly, folks often think of us as a diabetes company, but we have been in the Alzheimer's space for over 30 years now, and have had a lot of failures, negative trials during that time. But we've learned a lot from all of these studies about the disease, about how to measure the disease, about how to look at things that, as folks were talking about, what does it mean to be a clinically meaningful difference, and how do we make sure we're making an impact with treatments. And so we've done a lot of different work, not only in the therapy space, but also on diagnostics and making sure we're giving researchers, scientists, doctors, HCPs tools to be able to identify and diagnose patients as early as possible, because what we're learning is that the earlier you treat patients, the better and stronger impact you're likely able to have. And so a key part of that is not only our clinical research partnerships, but also working with stakeholders like all of you in the room, policymakers, legislators across the spectrum, to make sure that we're creating an environment where we can achieve the best possible course, best outcome for patients and families living with Alzheimer's disease. So this is a busy slide, but really is meant to just be a snapshot of different things that Lilly is working on in our neuroscience portfolio. Right here, this second line, that is about our drug donanemab, and that is the anti-amyloid therapy that is before FDA right now, awaiting a decision on approval, and we're very optimistic about that. We're also studying it in preclinical Alzheimer's disease, so before you even start to show symptoms, because as I mentioned, we continue to believe that treating it as early as possible will lead to the strongest likelihood, the best outcome of success. We also have several other different things focusing on different mechanisms of action, a treatment looking at tau, which is another protein in the brain, whereas these look at amyloid. And then we have some gene therapies looking at other neurodegenerative diseases, such as frontotemporal dementia, or FTD, Parkinson's, which is not a form of dementia, but another neurodegenerative disease, and then symptomatic Lewy body dementia, and then a really early stage asset, potentially for the treatment of ALS. But what is also wanted to make sure was reflected on this slide is the work that we've done to develop diagnostics. And so we have 2 FDA-approved PET tracers. So these are diagnostic radiopharmaceuticals, where you essentially, and I think someone alluded to it earlier, you can get essentially a brain scan to detect the presence of either beta amyloid in the brain or the presence of tau. And those are 2 of the biological hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. So if you do not have Alzheimer's if you don't have one of those characteristics, one of those biomarkers. Any questions on this before I keep going? And I can't see you guys in the room, so please just feel free to jump in.
I think just keep going.
Okay. Real briefly, so donanemab, it sounds like folks in the room are very familiar with this class of anti-amyloid therapies, but just so folks know, donanemab targets the fully formed plaque. So there's all these different stages at which these plaques are made, and donanemab works to clear the fully formed plaque from the brain. I put this slide up, which again is a bit complex, but really to try to share a little bit about how we studied donanemab in the clinical trial. And I think the key thing here is that because this is a anti-amyloid therapy that works to clear amyloid from the brain, what our researchers felt very strongly about was that there wasn't much sense in continuing to give the therapy once that amyloid was cleared out of the brain. So beginning at about 6 months of treatment, so right here, so at 24 weeks, participants who were on donanemab were given another PET scan to measure and assess the level of amyloid in their brain. And if the level of amyloid was below a certain threshold, they were moved to placebo, obviously without them knowing, so we wouldn't worry about unblinding. But the idea being that once you clear the amyloid, there is no need to continue on this therapy. And so those 6 months checks were done at 24 weeks, 52 weeks, and 76 weeks. And what we found is that nearly half of patients actually cleared amyloid by that 1 year mark. And their benefits continued. The amyloid stayed away. And so we think that this limited course of therapy or limited duration dosing, if replicated in real-world practice, can bring real value for patients, care partners, physicians going forward. So that's, obviously, we do not have a label yet, or we don't have an approval yet, but that's something that I think has been really interesting to lots of folks. These are just a few key highlights from our phase 3 study. And this Trailblazer ALZ 2, that was the name of the study, was the first phase 3 study to replicate the results of a phase 2 study for these anti-amyloid therapies. So in January 2021, we announced positive results of a really small phase 2 study, and that's when the work began on this phase 3 study. And I'll just say, as someone who was nervously anticipating the results, Lily had been through many negative readings in the past. The outcome was better than we could have, sort of our best expectations. And that not only did our phase 3 trial meet its primary endpoint, but it met all of its secondary endpoints that measured cognitive and functional decline. So in a nutshell, those on donanemab treatment delayed clinical progression by 35% as compared to those on placebo. And this is measured by the IDRS scale, which we think is a more sensitive scale, measures activities and functional outcomes that are more meaningful to patients than the CDR sum of boxes. However, there was also, we hit clinical significance as measured by the CDR sum of boxes as well, which I believe one of the prior speakers mentioned that scale in another trial. Nearly half of participants on donanemab had no clinical progression at 1 year, so they were stable, which we found to be, I think that was something that folks were very excited to see and meaningful. Participants on donanemab had 40% less decline in their ability to perform activities of daily living at 18 months. And as I mentioned earlier, over half of all participants completed their course of treatment by 12 months, meaning that on a subsequent PET scan, they had cleared amyloid below that threshold, and so were able to come off of drug. So let me pause there and just see if there are any questions from the group on anything here.
No questions. I do want to warn you, though, we have a very full schedule, so if you don't mind summarizing a little bit more, because we do have other topics to get to, but so appreciate you being online and sharing the information.
So maybe I'll just flag this, and then I can maybe cut to the last slide. But this is just a timeline. Really, the big point here is this last one here, that we're expecting an FDA decision by the end of this year. And so then we would be hopefully another approved drug, and folks will have to make similar decisions about coverage and access to these therapies. And I want to just flag something on the point that folks have made about clinical meaningfulness. There has been a lot of effort, both from scientists within our organization, folks at the Alzheimer's Association and elsewhere, to better explain what it means to delay disease progression, what that means for patients, what that means for families to have more time, and helping to translate for folks what that means. And I can work with Jamie to make sure we get you guys some of those publications that help explain that, I think, in some ways that are more relatable as to non-scientists too. So maybe I'll just jump to this last slide. I think one thing we just wanted to focus on too is that we've had a lot of different conversations in different environments about potential state policy solutions. I think it is clear that from the data that we've seen and others, that the earlier you treat patients, the better their outcomes. We've seen that in our phase 3 results. And so making sure that patients and families have access to a timely and accurate diagnosis is just essential. I think Arkansas is already doing tremendous things by having this policy council, this advisory council in place. And conversations we've had across the country are the importance of ensuring HCPs are educated about how to identify patients, that they have access and are incentivized to do these assessments and have access to the screening and diagnostics. And we continue to think it's important that patients have access to those therapeutics, both at the federal level through CMS and Medicare, and also at the state level and access in different insurance plans as well. But I know I just threw a lot at you, so I'll pause and just let me know if you have questions or want to go back to anything there.
Yes, we do. Senator Love has. Oh, okay. He has a question of this group. So it's kind of hard for me to see the screen from the distance that I'm looking at. I was able to look at Brandon Smith's computer here. So I just want to kind of summarize. You expect the FDA to approve by the end of this year, in December of 23. So we will probably have to recircle back with all of the insurance companies and again find out, are they going to cover it, and kind of continue with this conversation. In other words, this is going to continue to come up. So are there any questions from this committee? David Cook.
Just a question for the panel. Thank you all for your presentation, and I appreciate the information you shared today. One of the things I heard from the first presentation was our health systems may not quite be adequately equipped to disseminate these drugs. And so one of the questions we had at the association is, how do we best prepare our health systems when access becomes available to be able to disseminate and deliver these drugs when they're here?
I know Jody Ann did a great job presenting last month, and I'd love to hear her thoughts, not to put you on the spot, but if you have anything to share. But I wanted to say, just to kind of circle back around, we did hear today that some payers are going to pay for it. It's going to be available, at least from a payment perspective. There may be prior authorizations and things that have to be met in order to ensure that it's being used correctly for the amount of money you're going to invest in this. I mean, money's just part of it, right? It's a significant investment, because you spend it on this, then that may be dollars you can't spend on something else for some other horrific disease that there may be out there that we need resources to treat. But even if more companies come online, I do think this whole, what is a fair marketplace, what does access look like? I mean, Soleo's a great company, interdisciplinary, out of Texas, I talked about earlier, but they also aren't just a specialty pharmacy. They own their own infusion clinics. So they are direct competitors, if you will, to Arkansas hospitals or Arkansas-based clinics. So it is a concern as there's more usage and more coverage, that the manufacturers recognize the need for access and fair competition, and allowing Arkansas-based providers to be able to, who have the relationships with the patients, who know the caregivers, to be able, you were talking about earlier requesting that UAMS get access to it. UAMS ought to be able to order it themselves and not have it delivered from a pharmacy out of Arizona, where there's all kinds of questions about that delivery chain of command and all that stuff. They ought to be able to get it directly. Just wanted to make sure, if I didn't make that clear earlier, that will be an ongoing issue with all of these high-dollar medicines.
Do I want to put her on the spot? Do you want to say anything? Yeah. Jody Ann Tritt with the Arkansas Hospital Association. Thank you.
Sure. I couldn't have said it better myself. That's why we're pretty good partners. That's absolutely accurate. And the same thing I told you last month. You can have a drug that is somewhere, but if we can't get access, if I can't get Dr. Way access, and the hospital can't advocate on her behalf and on the patient's behalf to get it, because the pharmaceutical manufacturers are playing the game called I win, and they always do, then we run into trouble. So that's where I'm really glad to have participation from Eli Lilly and others to talk to us about how to work together really well, because limiting access is almost criminal, especially when our patients have to have these drugs. And you can limit access a bunch of different ways. One, you can have the internal dealings that John talked about, to where you make it and you're the only one who can supply it. Or you can limit it by cost alone, and you play haves versus have-nots, which is also unacceptable. So at the Hospital Association, what we want is we want the diagnostic tool covered by insurance companies. In addition to the medication, once a physician and a patient's caregivers and care team have made a decision that a particular patient needs a particular drug, we need to do everything we can to make that happen. And that's what we advocate for every day when we advocate for our patients and for access to medications, therapeutics, drugs, diagnostic tools, and frankly, even physical therapy that they need that we don't always get to give them.
Can I flag one thing too?
Sure.
We've talked a lot about access to the therapeutics, but there has been, CMS has had a national coverage determination with coverage with evidence development in place for almost a decade around these amyloid PET tracers. And they recently just announced a proposal to actually lift some of those restrictions, which is really exciting and really exciting for patients. But they will essentially they will retire that coverage decision and leave it to the state MACs, so the regional contractors, to make those coverage decisions. So we've been encouraging CMS to be vocal about the value that they see in those diagnostic tools, so that MACs make a decision that makes it easier for patients to get access to these as appropriate, these diagnostic tools. But that's just another challenge, another piece of the puzzle that is coming down the pike too.
Any other questions from the committee? Yes, Dr. Azar.
So, Maureen, we don't manufacture the tracer, the Amivid, or anything in Arkansas. We don't have the infrastructure. That's not manufactured here. So we get it from, we have to either get it from Dallas or Memphis, and there's transport costs, then it has to be done within 2-3 days. So, or we send our patients to Memphis or Dallas to get the PET scan. So is there going to be any time Lilly setting up a factory in Arkansas for the tracer?
So I will go back and speak to the team. I'm not sure. I know that they are confident that anywhere in the U.S. folks can eventually have access to that tracer, but I'm happy to go back and confirm that because it's a good question, and I'm not sure.
And we are just continuing to open up dialogue, and we'll continue this topic because there's, the early diagnosis is so critical and is very rare here in Arkansas. We're not getting too much into that in this discussion. Maybe we can talk at greater lengths and bring some other people in on that. We've talked about the PET scan, the availability of that. David, we've kind of had some conversations along this lines, just talking. And do you mind sharing a little bit of the hope we have in the future from Alzheimer's regarding early diagnosis?
Sure. I think Dr. Way touched on this last month during her presentation, but we are hopeful that we'll have availability of being able to detect Alzheimer's using a simple blood test. We're still a ways away from that. We can't wait for that to build out infrastructure to make sure that physicians across the state actually have access to diagnostic tools at the bare minimum, like the AMOCA or some mini cog test, to refer that on to a specialist. I think, as has been mentioned this morning already, that these drugs are only they're only viable for people in the very earliest stages of mild cognitive impairment, which means the state needs to make more investments on awareness at the clinician level, but also with consumers about the importance of early detection and diagnostics, and also making sure we have reimbursement models in place to incentivize providers to have those conversations with their patients as well. I know that's about it. We do have hope, and I know we talk a lot about fiscal responsibility, but that's a hard sell for a patient who, at the bare minimum, just wants more time with their family. And so we can't afford to wait for access. We need to continue to push for those things.
Dr. Azar?
Actually, we are doing early diagnosis. We have been doing it for the past 1 year. We have been doing spinal taps. We are doing amyloid tau phospho-tau ratio. So we are up with early diagnosis. We are doing here at UMS. Anyone wants it, we get the result within 2-3 weeks. We send the fluid to Mayo Clinic. The out-of-pocket cost for it is about $500 unless another insurance picks it up. So we don't need the PET amyloid scan. We can do the spinal fluid. It takes 10 minutes to do it. We do it under fluoroscopic guidance. So we are doing early diagnosis. We are set up for it. I think other hospitals are probably also set up for it, but we have done it for more than 50 patients right now. And anyone who comes in, I'm happy to get it set up and get it done. So within 1 month, they will have the result. They will be eligible for monoclonals. The other thing that we will have to do, one other test that we will have to do is just get the ApoE4 status confirmed, because with ApoE4, the chances of hemorrhage are more. So if they're ApoE4 homozygous, we would not include them in the therapy. But we are set up to do it. So please don't think that the diagnostic possibility is not there. It is there, and we have been doing it for at least more than a year now.
Thank you for clarifying that. I needed that cleared up because I was kind of left with last time, oh no, we're not getting these diagnoses early enough. So I guess I do want to ask, because I didn't specifically ask the insurance companies, are they covering those early diagnoses? All the testing that's there, is that being covered? That might be the next question to ask. Does Medicaid cover that?
So yes, we do. So they're, based on my understanding, and I'm not a clinician, but based on my understanding, there's two tests that can be used, and they're an either-or situation. One is the PET scan, that is out of state, and one is called a cerebrospinal fluid testing, or CSF testing. We cover both. Now, my understanding is the PET scan is not available in Arkansas. So typically, to cover a service that is not available in Arkansas, it has to be a provider that is willing to take Arkansas Medicaid. But if that provider is willing to take Arkansas Medicaid, then yes, we would cover it out of state.
Okay. Employee benefits, I guess you just handle the medicine. So, okay, we'll get more of those answers next time. I'll ask the insurance companies, and maybe we'll have Blue Cross and Centene and all of them here next time to answer those more directly. Okay, we do have a full agenda and some other topics to get to. Senator Love, did you want to make a general statement at the end?
Well, yeah, I guess you all were talking about it because I'm trying to piece this puzzle together in regards to the diagnostics and, who's covering what. And then also, just as a general question, when you say Medicaid does cover it, how many patients are we talking about that is in the space of dementia, Alzheimer's? How many?
So I don't have that number today. We can look for you. If you look at the ages of this population, it is early onset, so we do have more of a Medicaid population than typical, but it's 50 to 90 for this drug. 65 and over is typically Medicare. They are payer first. We pay after Medicare. So, we're really talking about those before age 65 here. That would be primary Medicaid.
So do you have a number?
I can get one, but I don't have one off the top of my head. So.
Okay. I think that would be good. But yeah, I was just trying to piece this puzzle together. I mean, I hate to sound like that, but when we begin to talk legislatively about covering the drugs and different things like that, and what Medicaid is going to look like moving forward, I mean, these are the kind of some of the questions that we're gonna run into. So, but thank you.
I have another question for you. Is Medicaid going to cover also the MRI cost and the screening with MRIs for the drug?
So we cover anything that's considered one of our typical benefits within our limits. And so, we have limits, and I didn't bring all those lab limits. I was trying to find them on my phone. So if you want to talk to me afterwards, we can go over that. But within those limits, yes, we would cover those things.
Okay, great discussion. We'll continue it next month with some other topics. I know that we might even have some medicines that, from what I understand, if you use it in the home, it's easily approved, but when you use it in a nursing home or assisted living facility, it's often not approved. But we'll discuss that in the next meeting, and anything else. I'm always open to ideas and topics. Thank you for being with us online. Maureen, thanks for taking the time out. Very informative, and we'll look forward to hearing more in December from the FDA. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And thank you all the guests who've come in for this topic. We appreciate your input, and just appreciate the opportunity for all of us to just have discussion on it. The way that we learn is by talking to each other and hearing all different sides of an issue. So appreciate that. We're going to move on. David Cook, do you just want to do it from right there where you are instead of moving down there?
Sure.
And in the meantime, I think we need this laptop set up for Carrie Jordan. Is it already on there? Okay, never mind. I was going to tell you to go down and start getting that set up. But David has put together a packet of information. We have to give to the Speaker of the House and the Senate Pro Tem, and also the Governor, a report every year due by October 1st. And he's going to go briefly through this report that you have in front of you so we can turn that in and make sure we're doing what we're supposed to do.
Sure. So what's in front of you is Exhibit D. And basically what I did was put into paper the presentation that I shared with you all last month, talking about just the status of legislation that advanced during this session. And so I did try to direct back to some of the priority areas in the Alzheimer's state plan. And then, of course, included disease information, our statistics, and some overview of the council's work. This is what we will submit unless there's any edits that need to be made. And I'm happy to take any questions.
A lot of this was what was in your presentation last month and everything. Can I have a motion to go ahead and say that we're good with sending this on by October 1st? Rachel Bunch, thank you. A second. Kathy, thank you very much. And all those in favor say aye. Anyone disapprove? Say no. There you go. Thank you. Okay, we will submit this thank you for all your hard work, David, on putting that together. Really appreciate it. Okay, we will move on to the assisted living rate discussion. We've kind of had these discussions in the last, little bit, the last meeting. And Jay Hill, I'm going to let you bring us up to date. We do have a kind of Excel spreadsheet that shows where some money got distributed based on $2 million that ALC approved to go to help some assisted living facilities. Do you mind just reminding some members, what this was, what we were trying to do? Just for those who weren't here and don't know anything about it, or someone watching online, this is the first time they've heard. Can you explain what this is?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So the spreadsheet that you have labeled Exhibit E is the result of an ARPA request that was made and granted for $2 million for assisted living facilities to offset lost revenues incurred as a result of the public health emergency. It required an attestation from a facility, as well as an agreement to be audited on the utilization of those funds. And we put this out for all the assisted living facilities that have Medicaid beds. So this was open to not private pay facilities only, but facilities that provided bed space for individuals who are on our Living Choices Medicaid waiver. Okay, we had. As you see the spreadsheet, it lists the amounts that were granted to each of those facilities. It was based on a 5-year look back on the number of utilization days, bed days in a facility, Medicaid bed days in each of those facilities. We had 5 facilities that did not participate in the program. 4 did not return an attestation, did not submit the documentation needed for disbursement of funds. 1 facility verbally opted out. There is approximately $220,000 that was remaining of that bucket that would have been allocated to those facilities. We are in the process now working with our Division of Medical Services to redistribute those monies utilizing the same formula that was used in the initial payout. So the number of bed days, those utilization days from 2019 through 2023, 5 fiscal years, will be used to allocate those remaining dollars out to all the facilities that are already participating.
Okay. So some of these facilities will be getting, actually I guess all of them will be getting a little bit more.
Correct. All of them will be getting a little bit more.
Okay. Are there any questions regarding this? Okay, appreciate that update. And then second is a rate increase or decrease or setting a new rate, I guess I should say. Can you update us? Where are we in that?
Yes, ma'am. So Act 198 of the General Session this year produced a requirement now in statute for assisted living facilities to produce cost reporting data to the Department of Human Services. And again, these are for the ALFs, assisted living facility. We have an acronym at DHS for everything. For those ALFs that have Medicaid beds that participate in our Medicaid program, they have all, let's say almost all have turned in their data. We began working through the process when the fiscal year began. We put the survey out on August 11th and then held a provider call, open call with them all to discuss the survey, to talk about what do the terms mean, give them opportunity to ask questions. Had a really good provider engagement in that call. We still have 7 outstanding facilities. So if memory serves, I believe there are 54 facilities that are reporting data. We have 7 outstanding, some for various reasons. For instance, we had a facilities whose CFO had an unexpected emergency and wasn't able to be present here toward the end of the reporting period. We've been in communication with those. We are also working with the Healthcare Association and with the Arkansas Assisted Living Association to just to help get that information from those outstanding facilities. In the meantime, DHS has, we have a vendor engaged that does work in this space that will take all the data that comes in from the facilities and through an analytics process, be able to give us that data that, just as Representative Mayberry was speaking of, what is the cost of doing business in the assisted living facilities over the previous 12-month period. As we get close to the end of the temporary rate that we have in place, so during the public health emergency, we were enabled to submit an Appendix K request through the Living Choices waiver and increase the rate, the daily rate that we pay for services in and out for a Medicaid beneficiary. The permanent rate is $67.25 a day. Presently, and what we have been paying now for some time, what we've been reimbursing for probably close to a couple of years now, is an $81 or an $85 rate, depending upon urban or rural placement, depending on where the facility is. We are coming up very close to that November 11th deadline in which our rates would revert. Now, CMS has granted states the opportunity to submit for those rates to continue past the end of the public health emergency, which we have done. So in the event that we are not able to get a rate determined, we have to work through public comment. And then obviously there is a submission to our federal partners, CMS, and we don't control the timeline with which those determinations are made. So we've made application that would allow us to continue at the present rate, at the $81 or $85 a day, and it is allowable for the duration of your waiver. So for us, it will extend for a period of time until such time as we would make an amendment request to CMS for a different rate, and that would be based upon the results of a cost report study.
Okay. Any questions from the committee on that? Very informative. Jay Hill, we always appreciate your information, and we'll be asking again for follow up when we meet again. So thank you. Okay, thanks for the information. Well, now we're going to get to a really exciting program. Saw a presentation on this a few months ago and looking forward to allowing her to share with this committee and anybody who might be watching online. So Carrie Jordan from UCA, I'm going to let you take over and share what your program is all about.
Okay, thank you, Representative Mayberry. And I just need to let you all know I don't have control of the clicker, so I'm going to have to be having Brandon change slides for me, so just bear with me as we deal with the technological issues. I'm excited to talk about this program. We've been talking a lot about pharmacological interventions today, and now I'm going to talk about some non-pharmacological interventions that we provide through the Interprofessional Activity Program at UCA, otherwise known as ITAP. I need to make you aware of our sponsors. We have been sponsored by a grant from Blue and You Foundation, and that has helped us to expand tremendously, but also we had some startup costs for the UCA Foundation, which we're truly grateful for. As you all are aware, the state plan that we've all helped develop has 4 primary focuses of attention, and the ITAP program actually addresses 3 of these. Specifically, it addresses access and quality of care, support for the family caregiver, and also dementia training and workforce development. And I think this last point is probably the most exciting thing about ITAP programming, and we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. The mission of ITAP is that to meet the needs of older adults at risk for or diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias and their caregivers. And we do that by harnessing students to provide programs to help with physical activity, cognitive engagement, risk assessment, and hopefully improve quality of life as well. This is within the College of Health and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Central Arkansas. We have 9 different disciplines. 6 of those disciplines are involved with ITAP programming. And so this is an interprofessional program as well. Just briefly, as you all are more than aware, that dementia leads to progressive decline in cognitive and functional status. And studies have demonstrated time and again that decline leads to bad outcomes for both the person with dementia and the caregiver. So you have decreased quality of life, you have increased caregiver burden, and institutionalization of those with dementia eventually because of these declines. So therefore, the idea of maintaining cognition and functional status for as long as possible is something that is really needed in the community. And you can do that through pharmacology, but you can also do it through non-pharmacological interventions. So there is a growing body of research, a large and growing body of research that has really emphasized the importance of non-pharmacological interventions such as are displayed on this slide: exercise, cognitive stimulation, and social engagement. And if people with dementia are involved with these activities, they have improved quality of life, functional and cognitive outcomes. So there are several systematic reviews out there that demonstrate this time and again. There's also a large body of research that supports caregiver support programs, and that's caregiver support groups, but also coaching and various support programs, and specifically in decreasing caregiver burden. The problem is, and Brandon, you'll have to hit that button here real quick, a couple times. The problem is that a large number of people with dementia and their caregivers don't access those services. So there's studies that indicate that 30% of people with dementia access no services at all. And of those that do access services, most of the services that are accessed are things like custodial care, home care, where you might get help with bathing and dressing and things of that nature, or they might go to their primary care provider and get some medications. But the non-pharmacological therapies that I'm talking about are just, they don't access those. And the reasons they don't access those are multifaceted, but there's been studies that have demonstrated that 2 of the primary reasons are cost. Brandon, you can hit the button now. And availability. Those are 2 of the biggest reasons why people don't access services. Now, in higher ed, there's 3 trends that have been occurring in higher ed for some time that meld well, it dovetails well with these needs in the community. Specifically, experiential learning, which is a part of experiential learning is service learning, and that's where students take what they're learning in the classroom and then they apply it to actual needs in the community. And I'm just going to mention something about service learning because I've recently looked up a bunch of literature on it for another grant I'm applying for. But service learning is good in that it doesn't just affect the head of the student. It's more than knowledge. Service learning goes to the heart. And studies have shown time and again that service learning activities are the best way to change students' attitudes toward people with dementia, is service learning. The second thing that's a trend in higher ed is interprofessional education. So they're really wanting us to have students work more as a team versus being in our own individual silos. And then finally, this whole idea of stigma. Studies have shown time and again that students, when they get out of school, they choose not to work with older people, and they also choose not to work with people with dementia. And one of the big reasons why is because when they're in school, we have a tendency to give them opportunities that are like, For example, in Conway, at the University of Central Arkansas, the first thing we would introduce nursing students to was the nursing home. So we would, first clinical they've ever been on, we'd take them to the nursing home, and we'd have them spend a day giving baths in a nursing home setting. And that's the type of clinical experience. When a student leaves that setting, they're thinking, I'm never going to work in this place again. This is awful, okay? So we give them a bad experience, and that carries through into their professional careers. So this idea of combating student stigma through providing experiences for students that are invigorating is extremely powerful, and that's what we're trying to do in the ITAP program. Can you back up one slide, please, Brandon? So what is ITAP? ITAP is a combining of the community needs out there for people living with dementia and their caregivers with student needs. And currently at the University of Central Arkansas, we have 3 different programs that are all student-run. Okay, we have the Interprofessional Dementia Care Coaching course. This is a course that students take as an elective. It's a 12-week course. Actually, it's a 15-week course. The first half of the course, we teach them about caregiver burden and how to coach. And then the last half of the course, the students actually coach caregivers in the community and with supervision from faculty. The second program that we have for caregivers was started by an occupational therapy student for his capstone project a year ago, and it's the caregiver support group. So it's an actual support group that meets bi-weekly. Students lead it. Right now, you're going to meet Jessie here in a minute. She's leading this program for us right now. But in this program, we provide information for about 30 minutes, and then we actually hold a support group for the next hour. So for an hour and a half, we have this caregiver support group. The program I'm going to talk to you about the most today is the STAP program, which stands for Student-Led Therapeutic Activity Program. And it's our biggest program, and it's also the one I'm probably the most excited about, although the other programs are good as well. But this is the one I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about. So what is STAP? If you'll go to the next slide, this slide explains what it is. What it is it's an interprofessional program. It lasts the 12 weeks of the semester. We've been doing it this is our 5th semester now where we've been running this program. And it's once a week for 12 weeks. People in the community with dementia come to UCA. The caregivers drop them off, and then we have students do activities with these individuals for 3.5 hours once a day for the 12 weeks of the semester. You can see here that in the fall semester, we have exercise science students who lead tailored group exercises. We have communication science students who do individualized cognitive therapy, and then nursing students who do individual and group and cognitive stimulation and socialization. In the spring semester, we break it up just a bit. We have exercise science, and we have physical therapy that does individual strength, balance, agility, and mobility sessions, and then occupational therapy works with the people on individual and group cognitive stimulation and socialization. The next few slides just show you some pictures of our program, so if you want to just flip through those. So this is, if you go a little slow, Brandon, I'll go through it, just kind of describe each one. So this is an exercise science student doing group exercise therapy with some of our participants. This is some nursing students doing some fall craft activities. This was kind of a fun program. We had a man in the program who had been an archaeologist, and he was interested, so we allowed him to come up and actually do a presentation on his archaeology with help from his sister. And then we did an archaeological dig. So he was teaching us and all the participants how to dig for bones and whatnot in a systematic way. That man passed away, I'd say half a year later, and his sister told me that this was a real highlight, and she was so grateful that he had been able to do this. This is a poker game. Some of the men didn't really care for the craft activities, so one of our students said, hey, we can play poker. And so this was a weekly poker game that they would engage in, and they got to be quite friendly with one another as well. This was a final Christmas event that was put on by the communication science students. You can flip to the next slide. And then this is just some physical therapy students working one-on-one with people. So you can just flip through the rest of the slides. They're all pretty much the same, physical therapy students. So I know we're kind of low on time, so I'm going to actually skip through a lot of these next slides. I'm going to just summarize. We have gathered data, okay? We've been gathering pre- and post-test data in fall of 2021 and fall of 2022 on the effects of our programming on participants. And just to cut to the chase, what we found is that for most of our outcomes, we've been measuring 6 different outcomes, the people are maintaining their cognition and they're maintaining their function. That's what we want. They are not increasing those things, but they're maintaining them. And so that's a real positive finding, and it's one of the things we're wanting to achieve. Now, Brandon, if you'll just skip through multiple slides, I'll tell you when to stop. I want to get to the student outcomes because I think those are some of the more important outcomes. I think okay, go through one more, and I think we'll be there. Okay, so student outcomes. So we had 104 nursing students in 2021 that we measured before the activity and immediately after the activity. I do want to look at some of the demographic information of these students, which is on the next slide. Okay, so you'll notice that these are very young students, 18 to 24 years old, most of them. And most of them, 68%, had had no previous experience with people with dementia, none whatsoever. It was a pretty diverse group of students as well. Okay, so go to the next slide. So what we looked at is we looked at general attitudes for people with dementia and then also their self-efficacy or their confidence in working with someone with dementia. And what we found, you can see by the p-values there, is that we found statistically significant improvements in both of those scales and measures for those students. And not only that, but the effect of the intervention, if you'll go click one more time, Brandon, you'll see that the effect, and if you know anything about effect sizes, which you may not, but just the effect is very strong. It's a very strong effect on both student attitudes and their confidence levels. So to me, as an educator, this has been one of the most exciting things of this program because I routinely get feedback from students of how much this experience has changed the way they see people with dementia. On the next slide, I have some quotations from students, which I'll just read through one of them because we're going to have other students talk here in a minute. Here's the last one. I tend to be intimidated by the word dementia. It conjures up thoughts like sad, lonely, frustrating, gloomy, and lots of awkwardness. One thing I learned through this experience is that dementia is a continuum and people can be at any point along it at any given time. Many of the individuals I interacted with seemed mostly normal. Okay, so that was just one comment of many, many comments we've received from students about how this has impacted them. If you could go to the next slide, please. So you can keep going through the slides. I want to talk briefly about some of the costs. Okay, go back one slide. There you go. Okay, so one semester we did look at costs of the program, and this is the exciting thing about this. Is my hope for this program is that it doesn't just stay at UCA. I would really like to duplicate this program at other universities around the United States. I think it could make a huge difference. And so we did a little bit of a cost analysis. And we had 20 participants in the STAP program this particular semester, spring of 2022. And the total cost of the program for the semester was $2,325. That did not include faculty salaries. Faculty salaries are kind of folded into what we do as faculty members at a university, which is scholarship and service. So they kind of factor that into our workload. If you go to the next slide, you'll see how much that is broken down in terms of participants. So that's $116 per participant. Now, we did not charge the participants because we have these wonderful grants. But we did calculate that per hour, that's $2.42 an hour of activities. And if you compare that to the average cost of the average adult daycare center in Arkansas of $9.25, that's says quite a bit. And of course, the reason it's not expensive is because the students are doing the work, and we're not having to deal with a lot of regulations either, which is, there's some other safety issues, but I won't get into all of that. I'll talk about that some other time. Okay, so that's pretty much my presentation. Now, what I would like to do is I would like to allow two of my students that have been working in the program to just give it a brief summary of what they've gained from the program, so you can see firsthand that these are actual students that are being impacted. This is James. I'll let him introduce himself, and Jesse Bennett. And so I'll let you talk first, James.
All right. So I'm James Clayton. I'm a senior at UCA Exercise Science Department. I got this opportunity to be a part of the STAP program for my senior internship. And as you guys can imagine, being a senior, I was ready to wrap things up and kind of thought this was going to be just a cakewalk, just kind of get it done. And when I learned it was a little more involved, I was kind of burdened by it, as terrible as that is to say. But this program has been just incredible. And I think that's part of the reason why Dr. Jordan asked me to speak here today, is because of an incredible effect it has had on my life in just a short amount of time. And in fact, I've even looked into going into PT and other things that I never thought I would do just because of how incredible this has been. But I'm not exactly what what I
wanted you to say.
Yeah.
You said the right thing.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want me to throw in there?
No, that sounded good. I think you did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an incredible program, and I'm thankful we've got seven more weeks of it. And so I'm looking forward to it and the impact we make. So, yeah.
My name is Jessie Bennett. I am a graduate research assistant at the UCA School of Nursing. I'm currently pursuing my master's in mental health counseling. I met Dr. Jordan in August of 2022, so a little over a year ago. Her GA at the time was about to graduate, so I kind of filled her position and took her place. So I've been involved with STAP for a little over a year now. My roles today, I help administer the pre and post cognitive assessments for the STAP participants. I help co-lead the caregiver support group, as Dr. Jordan mentioned earlier. I help greet people, help them out of the cars every Thursday morning. I do a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, just help organizing, really anything Dr. Jordan needs me to do. So at the beginning, I was kind of hesitant to get involved. I haven't really worked with this population of people before. I didn't really know what to expect, but it has changed my life more than I thought imaginable. I kind of had that stigma of elderly people or people with dementia. You know, I didn't know kind of what to say to them, kind of like the awkwardness quote that y'all read earlier. But this program has allowed me to get out of my comfort zone and really build genuine relationships with these people. I mean, we have firemen and doctors and teachers and military men and just all sorts of people, different genders and races, ethnicities, cultures. They all have their own stories, and they're all have their own lives, and you get to build relationships and see like how these people lived. And it kind of takes that stigma off of like, this is a person with dementia, not like, that's not what defines them. They just have that disease. Thank you. So I think one of the things that is most rewarding to me is seeing their faces light up every Thursday morning when the students are waiting inside, and we can greet them out of the cars, and their just eyes are shining. They're excited to see the students and hang out with them. They're excited to see their friends and the other participants there that they've met. They just have a great time with the program. There's a sincere need for the type of help that this program provides, and when that need is met, people are just genuinely grateful. And I think by far this is the most rewarding thing that I've gotten to be a part of thus far in my life. So just to kind of conclude and wrap things up, I have a couple of quotes here from the caregivers who are a part of this program. If we could, I think they're on the slideshow, if we want to press that. So I'll just read these to y'all and kind of, I just reached out to our caregivers and asked what the program's meant to them and how it's impacted their lives. Great program. The crafts are accomplishments. The exercises are basically the only exercise he does. The program allows for some much needed me time when I know he's doing something more than watching TV that he can't remember. The support group is an outlet that helps me see differences in behaviors and how others face the challenges as they progress. BLOC. The program has been a blessing for my husband and myself. He gets excited and honored to help the students, as he has done for years, teaching anatomy and physiology, as well as teaching students in the OR during surgery procedures he was performing. It is also a much-needed break for me. I find the caregivers to be of tremendous help to find out what is out there to help our loved ones. Jeannie Fleischer. My sweetheart of the past 60 years now has short-term memory loss. He enjoys his time at STAP. The activities and associations with the students act as a tonic. He always leaves the program on a bright and cheerful note. Doris Knight. And our last one here. As a caregiver of an Alzheimer patient, I was feeling overwhelmed and alone. I needed help. I found this help in the STAP program, where I found others experiencing and feeling the same as I did. This support group has provided me with the emotional help I needed. Being in the same situation, the support group was able to lend me understanding, words of comfort that I much needed, and emotional support. Sally Roden. So as you can see, it's helped not only our participants, but their caregivers as well.
And if any of you want to come down and ever see the program firsthand, you're more than welcome to come down. Just let me know in advance so we can kind of plan for it.
That's a great presentation. Are there any questions for Carrie Jordan or the students that were here? David?
I was curious from both. I know you spoke a little bit about your career change into PT. How has participating in the program maybe encouraged you to pursue work with older adults?
Well, it's kind of a tough question. I always thought that I have a passion for helping people, and I really, and in a strange phase of life, not knowing what I want to do in life. And so this was just something that kind of broadened my horizon outside of exercise science to see something that I can actually help people, but also get a sense of gratification and that I'm actually doing something good in life rather than sitting behind a computer screen, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not for me, so.
Dr. Azar, I think, had a question.
Yeah, we were doing a program on integrative medicine at UMS before COVID, and then we stopped, but we did activities like this, exercise and other things, and yes, people enjoy it very much. If you would like to come by sometime and do it at our center, a couple of sessions, we would welcome it very much. And you would make great geriatricians, by the way.
There is a great need for that. We hear that over and over again. Dr. Way.
Yes, I want to congratulate Dr. Jordan. I want to congratulate Mr. Clayton and Ms. Jessie. You've done great. I would like to just mention that I started a similar program when I was in Boston, but it was with high school students. They were juniors, and they either had math or history or biology for the class they were in. Their teacher asked them to have a partner. You know, they would pair up with another student in class. They would go by the pet. There's a pet shelter there in town. They would check out a pet. Then they would take the pet to the nursing home and visit a resident. And it was absolutely night and day. We had patients who hadn't spoken for several years who would start to talk. We had patients who never, ever got dressed. They got dressed every day. I mean, it was really quite something. But the most, I think, interesting finding was that everybody had to fill out a questionnaire before and after. You know, what do you think of old people? What do you think of the nursing home? And you know all the answers. And then afterwards, they had another questionnaire. Of course, those responses were tempered, modified, and improved. But the real thing was, what did you learn from this? And most of the students said something that was similar to, I learned that one person can make such a difference in someone else's life. And it was phenomenal. So when the school got out, right, for summer, these kids still went to the pet shelter, checked out an animal, and they still went to visit their friend in the nursing homes. You know, you can't ask for more than that. So I want to congratulate you, Carrie, and want to congratulate you guys. This is what we all, I think, need to share and understand and do better at, because how much better would it be if we could all share that? Thank you.
That's fantastic. Any other comments or anything regarding? Yeah, we just need to figure out how to get all the schools, because every region of the state could benefit from this. So thank you for the presentation. Okay, so the next thing on our agenda is to figure out when our next meeting will be. And we had said the last Tuesday of the month, which actually puts it on Halloween. And not that that's too big of a deal, but our co-chair over here cannot be here that day. So I've asked about October 30th, which is that Monday at 1 o'clock. Is that agreeable to most people here to do it on October 30th at 1 o'clock? Yes? Okay. Okay, then we'll set that as our next meeting date. We'll kind of continue this conversation. I'll see if I can get the other insurance companies to come and join us and continue along this pharmaceutical route that we've been doing, and any other presentations. We did talk about in-home care and going into a little bit more in depth on that, and I'll follow up and try to get some speakers along that lines. If there's anything else that y'all want to add, please just let me know. Open to ideas, and appreciate the enthusiasm of this committee and everyone just being willing to listen and communicate. So yes,
I want to
Jennifer.
say something really quick. Last time the presentation that you gave really impacted me, and I thought that perhaps it would also, some of the things that you said to do, which I wrote down notes, and I'm sure it was a whole lot smarter than this. We're supposed to laugh, we're supposed to exercise, eat fresh fruits, and socially engage and learn. So I actually implemented that at my work. Oh. And the department heads are supposed to make sure that their staff laughs for a few minutes a day. So they try to come up with something funny. We exercise. Now, that is a little strange because I had to go out and weed eat behind our building. But I allow my staff to go and take a 10-minute break and just walk around in the sunshine. And then we learn, and we have a word that we learn every day. Today's word is avocation. Anybody know what that means? It means an interest that you have outside of what your career is. So anyway, we use that in a sentence. Try to learn those things. I would tell you that I have seen my staff get giddy and excited about the different things, and the mood has been better. So I do think it helps with that, but I honestly do think all of those things work together with Alzheimer's. And loved your presentation. It was awesome.
You just never know how you inspire someone. So yes, maybe we'll see some other businesses and organizations adopt that as well. And actually, Tony Bailey, I'm seeing you in the back there. I don't think you were at the last meeting. Do you have any update on the BOLD grant? Is there any update before we conclude on that?
So I'm going to say no.
Okay.
But I guess the only really update is, so we applied for the new round of funding, which we did not receive.
We did not receive that?
We did not receive it, correct.
Okay.
And so we're in the process
And
of...
did they give reasons why?
Well, there was only... there was a very small number of awards, if I have it correctly. I have a bunch of numbers in my head because we applied for several grants all at the same time. We were one of, David, correct me if I'm wrong, so there's 35, but they were in different categories, and so they broke those categories down even more, and we just happened not to be able, there were 15, so I have it correct.
Okay.
Yeah, just Arkansas had core capacity funding under the BOLD Act during the first round, and this time we assisted the health department to apply for enhanced level of funding, and those awards were minimal. But what we saw during the first round is the CDC would revisit applications they initially denied, and that was our case in Arkansas when we applied for core capacity funding. So we received it the second year. So it's possible, if Congress can get the budget done, that there will be another funding cycle, and they'll do some reawards. But when they do award enhanced level of funding, they go back to review the applications they've already received. There is a possibility we can get it further down the road.
Okay. Did we use all of the funding that was there before? Did we make use of?
No. So we use, if I remember correctly, Dave and I were just talking about this yesterday. Roughly about 60% of it, and a lot of it had to do with vacancies, and then some of the things that we tried to initiate that you didn't work out. You make a plan, and the plan just didn't work out that way. But we when it's all said and done, as far as reporting, I think we did pretty much exactly what we wanted to do or what we planned to do. CDC themselves, they were impressed with the work that we did. Unfortunately, just the application that we submitted didn't score high enough compared to the other states. But as David said, we still have the opportunity to get awarded at a later date. If you remember, even in this cycle, initially we were not awarded, but we did get awarded in year 2 of the grant.
So if you're saying we use 60% of the grant, so how much did we not use, and does that money still there? Are we still able to use it moving forward, or we had to return money to?
So that money will be, I'll say returned, so we never actually quote unquote received the money is how we're reimbursed, so that we will not receive those funds, correct?
Okay, do you know how much that was? What would 40% of that? I don't remember, I'm sorry.
134,000.
Okay, that we were not able to utilize?
That we were not able to utilize, yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's sad. Okay, I appreciate the update. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh, no, you're
I hadn't seen you, and I went, oh yeah, BOLD. We've completely forgot all about that topic. So.
But can I make one comment?
Yeah,
So and part of the challenge, and Dr. Jordan and a few others, sit on the coalition with us, and so the work is just hard, and trying to build up, and that's what we were doing is in this cycle is building up, and it just takes a little while to get going. So hopefully, if we can get into the second award, then we can do even more work. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Do I officially have to adjourn? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn? Dr. Way, thank you. Second? Thank you, Stephanie. And all in favor say aye. Okay, thank you. We'll see y'all October 30th.